Welcome to No Tears for Black Girls, where we're thrilled to give you a sneak peek of our new series, Tears for Black Boys. Every other week, we delve into the untold crime stories of Black boys and men who have slipped through the cracks of mainstream media coverage. Bringing these narratives to life is the resonant voice of performer DeMarcus Dark, with each episode meticulously crafted by award-winning author John Reedburg in his triple role as writer, producer, and director. If our new series strikes a chord with you, don't hesitate to leave us a comment. And remember to catch us when the full series launches.
Edenwald Houses, a morbid fascination for the press, its tortured history splashed across front pages. For decades, it loomed over the city, erected in a time when hope still flickered in the hearts of the desperate. But now, it stands as a towering reminder of broken promises and shattered dreams. A glimmer of light in the darkness of the Bronx, containing homes and lives clinging to survival, while the rest of the world turns a blind eye. Within these concrete corridors, hope is a scarce commodity, replaced by resignation and despair. In the 1980s, a PBS Frontline documentary known as The Child Savers debuted, exposing the brutal truths hidden behind those walls. The uncut footage would later be featured in the 1991 film Who Killed Adam Mann, revealing the real-life horrors lurking within. Both works provided an unfiltered look at what took place behind closed doors. But for those who lived it firsthand, walking through the gates of Edenwald was like facing their own personal demons. The footage captured by Carole Langer on New Year's Eve of 1983 was a haunting reminder of what went on inside. Responding to a call for child abuse at Michelle Mann's residence, caseworkers discovered one of her children, unnamed for privacy reasons, had endured months of repeated physical abuse, resulting in multiple fractures to his skull, ribs, face, and arms. Despite this damning evidence, the child remained in the home as caseworkers deemed it fit. The very foundation of the community shook in the wake of this tragedy, leaving its inhabitants reeling and uncertain. Over a year after the first horrific discovery, Michelle and her partner welcomed their youngest child into the world, Adam Mann. But his arrival would not bring joy and hope like most newborns do. Instead, it would shine a spotlight on the twisted reality of life in Edenwald. Born on February 20th, 1985, Adam joined his family in their home on Laconia Avenue in the Bronx. His mother, Michelle Mann, resided at 4030 Laconia, while his father, Rufus Chisholm, lived nearby at 1153 East, 229th. The household already consisted of 3 older brothers and a young baby sister, all bound together by a deep brotherly love. Their childhoods were far from easy, but they found solace in each other's company. Despite the challenges they faced in their home, they still managed to create fond memories growing up in the Bronx. They spent their summers cooling off at the local pool and playing football in the park. And when they visited their grandparents' apartment, they would run around and dance with their aunt and other adults. Many of these activities may seem familiar to most of us, but unfortunately for Adam and his siblings, there was a dark underbelly to their seemingly normal childhood. A history of abuse plagued their household, chronicled in a devastating documentary. The film uncovered just how many failures it took for Adam to lose his life and exposed the long-standing cycle of severe abuse that had been present since before he was even born. His mother, who had experienced similar traumas during her own upbringing, was described as cruel and excessive towards her children, even going so far as to mistreat them during potty training. But despite all the warning signs and red flags, it took countless failures within the system for this innocent child to meet such a tragic fate. And as the documentary delved deeper into the dark history of abuse and neglect, it painted a haunting portrait of a family caught in the vicious cycle of trauma. Her childhood was defined by abuse and chaos. Her mother, a frequent inmate, died after falling from a 6-story window during a violent altercation with another woman. With a history of drug abuse, her mother left behind a legacy of pain and dysfunction that would continue to plague the family. Despite multiple allegations of sexual abuse against her adoptive father, she was returned to his care time and time again. This environment made it difficult for her to form healthy attachments or properly care for her children, which led to a cycle of violence being perpetuated against them as well. One incident in particular stands out. Documented case records show that one of her children had to be hospitalized for a broken jaw at just 12 days after a news crew had visited their home. When a caseworker named Helen Hennigan got involved, she witnessed more disturbing behavior for herself, including Michelle Mann slapping one of the children and forcing them to sit on the toilet for hours as punishment. Despite these reports, Hennigan had no power to remove the children from the home. But she was not alone in recognizing the danger they were in. Another doctor, Dr. Robert Sundell of Columbia Presbyterian, also filed an abuse report when he treated one of the children for numerous bruises and fractures, including a fractured skull. But even with evidence of physical abuse and trauma, the lead caseworker still questioned if the injuries could have been caused by falling rather than abuse. This constant dismissal and minimization of their suffering only added fuel to the quiet outrage felt by doctors who knew there was an ongoing pattern of violence in this household. The lead caseworker, a man named George Medina, seemed to purposely turn a blind eye to the obvious signs of child abuse and neglect. He failed to visit the home for months on end, despite being required to do so monthly. The children were left in a dangerous and violent environment while he neglected his duties. It was only when Medina had no other choice but to address the situation. Helen Hennigan, working for a private agency, was powerless against Medina, who held all the decision-making power in this case. Even another caseworker who witnessed the abuse firsthand was told by Medina to stay out of it and not testify. Yet these children continued to suffer from horrific injuries like pierced intestines, ruptured spleens, liver damage, and multiple fractures all over their bodies. Injuries that couldn't be explained away as accidents or rough play. Michelle Mann, the perpetrator responsible for these egregious acts, could have been sentenced to 10 years in prison for her crimes. But as she sat in family court trying to explain away her nephew's fractured skull with outrageous lies about falling onto a radiator, it was clear that she lacked any sense of remorse or empathy for her actions. These children were living in a nightmare, and it took far too long for anyone with the power to make a change to finally step up and take action. It was a cruel twist of fate that this case never reached the district attorney's desk. George Medina, the guardian who should have stood up for justice, faltered and took the matter to family court. But in family court, a mere slap on the wrist is all an abuser received. Michelle Mann was only charged with neglect, despite evidence of severe physical abuse against her children. And so, the system failed once again, allowing little Adam to be sent back into the hands of his abusive mother. Born in 1985, Adam had already experienced trauma at birth, as he was immediately taken into protective custody. This was necessary given the history of abuse within the family. Yet, even with this precaution, Adam was not spared from harm. His older brother was brutally beaten and hospitalized multiple times with broken bones, each time covered up by their mother's lies. Adam and his siblings were placed in the Brooklyn Home for Children, where they were supposed to be safe. But when Michelle completed a short stint at the Foundling Center, a rehabilitation center for abusive parents, she was awarded custody of her children once again. And so, she returned to the same dangerous environment, a cramped apartment in Edenwald Houses, where she lived with her father and eventually reunited with Rufus Chisholm, her partner in crime since she was a mere teenager. Their home was a never-ending cycle of violence and tension. The frontline footage captured the explosive anger of Chisholm towards the caseworkers who arrived at their door, accompanied by a police officer for protection. Despite being in front of cameras, Chisholm didn't hold back in expressing his frustration. "These are my kids," he yelled. "I love them." But they don't show that love when they have no food or anything else. They don't give them anything. I have to scrape it all together myself. His words were filled with pain and desperation, revealing the failure of the system to provide for families like his. But as we know, this story does not end well. After returning to the Bronx, another abuse report was filed against Michelle Mann for keeping her children in a violent and unsafe environment. And just like that, the responsibility shifted back to child welfare, an agency already known for its incompetence. I wish I could tell you about happier days for little Adam, but those were few and far between. While some caseworkers insisted that everything was fine and dandy for the children, they were actually suffering from broken bones, scars, burns, and other serious injuries. One particular caseworker named Mary Newman had even visited the home with intentions of closing the case, stating there was no reason for removal. But over the next 2 years, things only got worse for the children, especially Adam. Rufus Chisholm's sister recalls visiting the home and finding Adam standing in a corner with his arms above his head. When asked why he was being punished, he answered through tears that he was bad. As his eyes rolled to the back of his head, she confronted Michelle Mann about her treatment of him. Her response: "Adam deserved it." The kitchen was dark and quiet, the only sounds coming from the fridge as Adam snuck in to steal some food. Michelle Mann's neglectful parenting had left him hungry and desperate. But his brother wasn't so lucky. As punishment for failing to potty train, he would face starvation and beatings at the hands of their mother. And despite obvious signs of abuse, caseworkers never showed up to help. Even when one caseworker did file a report, it was promptly ignored, and the case forgotten. Another child suffered a broken arm at the hands of their mother, yet still remained trapped in her care. Years went by with no intervention, leaving these children in a nightmare of a home with a woman who should never have been allowed to be a mother. Her cruel punishments only added to the already known facts about this case, proving that these children were indeed suffering under her care. For 7 long years, Adam and his brothers suffered malnutrition, abuse, neglect, and trauma. On March 5, 1990, they would face the most brutal attack yet, at the hands of Rufus Chisholm. Fueled by anger, Chisholm stormed into their bedroom in the early hours of the morning and unleashed a relentless beating on Adam. Reports state that Chisholm was enraged to find Adam taking food from the fridge, as if he didn't have a right to nourishment after years of neglect. He beat Adam with his fists, a book bag, a stick, and a belt, leaving over 100 bruises, welts, and lacerations on his small body. The brothers could only watch as their father bound Adam to a coat rack and used him as a punching bag. And through it all, Adam begged for mercy. It was later revealed that Michelle Mann's father had also violated Adam in the same way he had violated Michelle. His body bore the signs of this abuse. In his final moments, one blow from Chisholm split Adam's liver in 2, killing him. Despite overwhelming evidence and the opportunity to uncover the truth about how this family had been failed by the city's Child Welfare Administration, there was no trial due to pleas entered by Chisholm and Mann. The veil of secrecy surrounding the CWA prevented any justice for Adam and his brothers. The truth was never told. No one was held accountable or brought to trial. Private conversations between higher-ups revealed that every person involved with the Adam Mann case failed miserably. The Fatality Review Board admitted their negligence in addressing the violence within the household and their lack of follow-up. But it all seemed like empty words as they closed the case without any real action taken. Not a single worker or supervisor faced consequences for their neglect. These so-called child savers were just as guilty as the parents who abused their own child. Meanwhile, Michelle Mann was already making funeral arrangements for Adam at McCall's Bronxwood Funeral Home on 4035 Bronxwood Avenue. Another young life lost, swept under the rug without any justice served. Rufus Chisholm had already been questioned and charged in the death of Adam Mann, but Michelle had been evading the police. So they staked out this funeral home, anticipating her arrival to make final arrangements for her son's burial. It was here that she too was apprehended for her involvement in the vicious murder of her own child. News of Adam Mann's death quickly spread throughout the city. Reports from other states also surfaced of a child whose life had been taken by his own parents after enduring years of savage abuse. The news shocked many, though some were aware of the ongoing abuse. But even they were stunned at the extreme lengths it had reached. Adam's siblings were placed into foster care after witnessing the unimaginable horror. The years of abuse and recent tragedy took a toll on them in various ways. According to reports, one of Adam's brothers tried to end his own life during family visitations, stating that he wanted to join his brother in heaven. The children spoke of Adam and recalled seeing his face and name in newspapers and on TV following his death. They knew all too well the horrors that their family had endured and noticed the media frenzy surrounding it. Yet despite it all, they struggled to cope with their trauma. The lasting effects of their suffering can be seen on film, making it difficult to watch. In 1994, Michelle Mann was released from prison after serving time for 2 assault charges related to beating her children with a belt. Despite clear evidence of her larger role in the abuse, she was given only 3 years behind bars. Rufus Chisholm received a sentence of 7 to 14 years in prison and became eligible for parole in 1997. He was finally a free man. Chisholm, who had turned to religion in the prison system, gave an interview at Clinton Correctional in 1996. In it, he expressed remorse, but also painted a different picture of the events compared to his children's eyewitness accounts, almost as if trying to downplay the severity. When asked about his actions, he said, "I'm not that person anymore. But no matter what I say, people will see me as a monster. I have to prove myself through my actions." Some nights, he wished his victim could appear just so he could hear him say, "Daddy, I forgive you." For his surviving sons, he had this to say, "I want them to know that even though things are hard right now, they have someone who loves them. I want to be a part of their lives again and make it work as a family." Despite years of torment and abuse that ended with their brother's brutal death, 2 of the remaining Mann children were returned to their mother, Michelle Mann, without any consideration for the impact on the children. The cycle of violence had become their new normal. As the surviving siblings grew up and tried to move past their traumatic past, they became teenagers and eventually adults. Keith now has children of his own, and takes comfort in knowing that his experiences and those of his brothers taught him how to be a good parent. He is determined never to subject his own kids to the same horrors he endured. He ain't afraid to talk about what went down. He knows child abuse is still a major problem, and it needs to stay in the spotlight. He's long moved on from his past, but he'll never forget it, or the hell him and his brothers endured. His bond with his folks was shattered after all they'd done. Once he got older, he kept a distance between them and his own family. He weren't about to let their toxic influence taint how he raised his own kids. No, sir. He figured out how to be a good parent all on his own. And damn, did he take pride in that. So what's the takeaway from this video? What becomes of those who are broken? What happens when relationships are shattered? When hope and promises get torn apart? And what of the memories of those poor kids who got failed by the system? Some folks keep living in delusion, telling themselves these children didn't die for nothing. They say there's been changes made, that things have been turned around, that none of this is the system's fault. It's just unfortunate events that couldn't be prevented or foreseen. But if that's true, then why hide behind a veil of secrecy? Why not shout from the rooftops all the good you've done? Why do these agencies always get talked about in a negative light? Adam Mann's story is just one brutal example of how the system fails over and over again. They couldn't save one kid, let alone 4 brothers who needed them more than anything. Instead, they stood by and watched as their baby brother had his life snatched away right before their eyes, each and every one of them knowing exactly what that felt like. Adam Mann's tale should be known far and wide, just like many others whose stories have been swept under the rug or forgotten altogether. But instead, there ain't no mention of these children no more. No talks about what we can do to put a stop to it. It's like the past never even happened, and the cycle just keeps on repeating itself. Again and again and again. But for those who have been through it, it never fades away. It's always there, in every part of their lives. They can try to forget, but it'll always haunt them. Many have heard Adam's story, but not enough. You may be unfamiliar with his tale, or you may know it all too well. But one thing is certain. These are stories that we cannot stop telling. Names that we cannot allow to be forgotten. These are the bodies of work that remind us of the horrors hidden behind closed doors. Because if we turn a blind eye, if we choose ignorance, if we act like the problem has been solved when it hasn't, history will repeat itself. And it already has, far too many times. It's inexcusable. It breaks our hearts. And it's a crime that this is still happening today. These names are more than just headlines in the paper or thumbnails in videos. Adam Mann was a child, a victim of those who promised to love and protect him, and a system that failed him. Some may struggle to find someone to blame for his death. But in a world where so many have played a part in this tragedy, all we can do is make sure his name never fades, his story never forgotten. We must demand zero tolerance for these kinds of situations. As humans, we may not have the answers yet, but we are united in our desire to see an end to this. Will Adam be remembered tomorrow? We had to find a way, a path forward. Let Adam Mann rest in eternal peace. My heart goes out to his siblings and loved ones. Your pain and sorrow will never be forgotten by those who matter.
Thank you for listening to No Tears for Black Girls. Please download the Alive Podcast app and follow us on all major podcast platforms to stay updated with our latest content. If there is a topic or true crime case that you would like us to cover, please send us an email at notearsforblackgirls@gmail.com or visit our website, notearsforblackgirls.com, and leave us a voice message through our contact page. And always remember, stay loved, stay blessed, and be safe.